It's Tuesday, November 18th, 2014, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors in the Product Mentor program, Mike Claiborne, Director of Product Management at Amplify, to lead a talk on financial modeling. I'll just quickly explain the format. You might see some people popping in and out along the bottom of the screen throughout. Those would be other mentors and mentees actively participating in the Product Mentor program right now. And for those of you who are also joining us, maybe through the product group or through our YouTube channel or various other formats that we kind of let people know about what's going on, you can participate as well. As you have questions, post them to our Google Moderator channel, and you can get to that moderator channel by going to the productmentor.com/live. On the bottom of that page, you can see the moderator channel. At the top, you can see the live video stream. So if you have questions, post them there. I'm keeping an eye on the moderator channel, and as those questions come in, I'll be passing them along to Mike in semi-real time and getting a lot of great answers for you. So with all that said, let me just a little bit about myself. I'm the moderator. I'm Jeremy Horn, also known as the product guy in many circles, and I'll be moderating, getting your questions to and fro. Hey, Mike, I'll hand it over to you now.
All right.
/live on the bottom of that page. You can see the.
My name is Mike Claiborne. I am an Executive Director of Product Management at an ed tech firm in Brooklyn called Amplify. I've been in product management for about 7 years now, and then before that did some other stuff, and then way back in the day I was over in the engineering side. I started off as a software engineer. One of the reasons when that I went back and formally studied business was to have better abilities around financial analysis. And so I feel like I've developed a pretty strong skill set around that through my education, through working as a consultant, and through product management. And what I'd like to do tonight is just kind of share some of what I've learned and walk you through. So let's just go kind of. I'll switch over to my presentation to help me discuss what the agenda that I'm going to propose for tonight. So what I'd like to do is walk through how to evaluate an investment opportunity. And an investment opportunity could be something large, like your company wants to invest a lot of new money to start up a totally new product line, and they want you to go off and help them make that decision. Or it could be something smaller. Maybe you need to buy a new large Oracle server, and you're trying to make that decision. Kind of the general framework of what we're going to go through tonight should apply. Then I'm going to share some of the just general tips and tricks and advice that I have from the many ventures I've had in financial analysis, and then we'll quickly walk through an example. And I'm gearing this tonight towards product managers who don't have a formal education in financial analysis. So if you've got an MBA or if you started off as a banking analyst, this stuff's going to seem fairly obvious to you. But if you don't have this background, hopefully what I share tonight should be interesting. All right, so let's get started. Product managers, we use different analysis to support decisions. I think of that kind of breaking it down into quantitative and qualitative analysis. Financial analysis is one of the many quantitative analysis. Another one is website traffic, customer service call analysis, surveys. And then on the other side, we have qualitative analysis, customer interview campaigns, competitive analysis. So I view these all in a big bucket of skills, or different types of analysis that a product manager can bring to his role to help guide his organization through decisions. Within financial analysis, there's a lot of different types of decisions that we might try and undertake, and analysis we might try to do to support those decisions. So if we're making an investment, like we're going to discuss tonight, we might do payback analysis, ROI analysis. We might forecast profit and loss. If we're testing to see, evaluating whether a product line is healthy, we might do a historical trend analysis. If we want to reduce costs to improve our margins, we might look at cost drivers and do a historical profit and loss analysis. And if we're setting pricing for our product, we might try and understand what the marginal costs are for each unit of sale, and think about how that would impact, different pricing would impact the forecast. And I'm just showing these first two introductory slides to kind of fit in the big picture where I see financial analysis fitting before we dive in. When I think about evaluating an investment opportunity, I usually think about cost projections. So how do I figure out how much it's going to cost, both the initial investment as well as ongoing costs? Then I think about revenue projections. So how much, if there are, sometimes the investment doesn't have revenue. It might just be, you're doing the investment to save costs. But if there are revenues involved, if you expect a revenue impact, you want to do revenue projections. I then think about return analyses, so trying to understand what kind of return am I getting on my investment. And you can get a return on your investment even if your project is one that results in reduced costs. And then I'll want to run those through different scenario and sensitivity analysis to try and figure out, how sure I am of this and what it would look like under different scenarios. Now, this is kind of the superset, or the full granddaddy way of doing financial analysis. I mean, if you're doing a smaller project, you wouldn't necessarily do all of this. You would want to kind of scope the amount of work you put into financial analysis to the size of the investment that you're evaluating. So if we start off with costs, when I think about the cost to consider in an investment or an option we're considering, I want to think of everything that's incremental to what I would have already done. So let's suppose we're going to build a new software as a service product. There would be a lot of initial investment activities. We would need to do the initial software development for the product. If it has content that we need to develop, we'd have to invest in the content development. We might have to purchase a domain name. So there would be those types of costs would fall under an initial investment. And then we'd also want to think about what the ongoing costs are. And sometimes people don't spend as much attention to these, but we might have increased IT ops costs if we are launching a new video product for a company that doesn't do video. Might have a huge increase in bandwidth on your network. The license of content or software that you use, increase customer support. What the products that I have complementary products that are physical, so I have to also think about not just the cost of purchasing those physical goods, but also holding costs and shipping costs. There's software maintenance. I mean, it's never just the initial build of the product. You have to figure in ongoing maintenance of the product, customer acquisition and marketing and communications, sales commissions. So these are all. I'm not going to go as much into cost tonight because I kind of feel like the costs are a little bit easier to do. That's the one that's less scientific and usually doesn't catch people up as much. But that's kind of the initial take on what the costs are. Cost thinking is. And when you're thinking about the costs, you want to understand the drivers behind the cost, especially for those things that are ongoing costs that are going to grow as the business. And just understand, like, how do those costs increase over time? So there's some types of costs that are a one-time cost, and that's it. If you have to purchase an expensive domain name for your new business, that's going to be a one-time cost, and the renewal fees on that are negligible. Registering a trademark or a patent is a one-time cost. Other costs increase in steps, right? So if you have to purchase a new server now, and then you maybe have to purchase one in 6 months if your business grows, those are kind of step increment cost drivers. Another one is customer service reps. If you got a very small customer service rep department, like one person, and your new business event, your new product is going to cause you to have to hire another person, then you're going to see that customer service cost increase in a step-like function. And then there are other things that increase linearly. So if you license content and you pay per every customer you acquire, then that's going to scale linearly with your number of customers you have. App hosting generally scales linearly. Customer acquisition costs like Google Ads would scale linearly. So when you think about those costs and you project them out through the course of your analysis, think about what types of costs they are and what drives them, and make sure you model those correctly. All right. So now we're going to go into revenue. I mean, revenue is where, like, the essence, in my opinion, where the essence of the model, financial modeling is. I mean, this is the one that's hardest to get right. It's as much art as it is science. So it's very hard to predict the future. Costs is much easier to predict out cost than it is revenue. There's a type of person who would approach modeling in a way that I call the 10%er, right? So the 10%er would say, we'll just take 10% of the market, right? I don't want you guys to be 10%ers. I want you guys to make realistic, grounded assumptions that are based on data or facts, or whatever you can get to make those assumptions as realistic as possible. But please, by the time we get to this presentation, at the end of the presentation, no longer be a 10%er and just say we'll take 10% of a market when you do your revenue forecasting. So when I think of how to forecast revenue analysis, I kind of think of it in this way. I want to figure out like what's the total market out there. Then I want to think about what's the addressable market, and this is one that people often forget. You often aren't able to sell into the total market. You might not have distribution into certain segments of the market. There might be certain segments of the market who just don't want your product. It might be that they want complementary products sold with the product that you don't offer. For whatever reason, you need to scale back and figure out what realistically, what portion of that market are you even able to address? And then once you've figured out what the addressable market is, you then need to go in and think about what your share or your win rate within that addressable market is. So people often forget this. People often forget this middle step, scoping, scaling down to an addressable market, and then they often overestimate their share of the market. So we'll go in a little bit tonight and talk about how to be a little bit sharper on those. So estimating the total market for your new product or your existing product, I feel like for existing markets, it can sometimes be easier because depending on the market, you can go out and find data on those markets. If it's at all related to financing or construction or a lot of other segments, you can find government data on it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the federal banks. Federal bank puts out a lot of different types of research reports on real estate and housing builds and etc. The Department of Ed puts out a lot of stuff on education. So the government's one source. Industry news blogs are a great place to go, and magazines, interviews, and news releases from competitors. So oftentimes if you go look to a competitor's website, somebody's already in the market, and you look at these news releases, you'll find a news release or an interview from one of their senior execs, and they'll oftentimes throw in a fact or two about the market that you can use, and if you're lucky, they'll include the source so that you can go and dig deeper on that. There's also research reports, and there's tons of places that you can get research reports. There's market-specific ones like Nielsen and Kagan for the entertainment industry. Another good place is industry groups. So figure out what's the the industry group that kind of lobbies on behalf, and look to see if they have any research. Like the CTIA for wireless will put out research reports. So that's a really often good one to go. For investor reports, like the ones that investment banks put out, can be real good. Tech reports, if you're in a tech industry, like Forrester and Gartner. And a new one that's popping up is blogs. Business Insider, GigaOM, VentureBeat, all put out paid research reports on various tech-related or entrepreneurial-related businesses, media businesses. So these are examples of places that you can go out and find research reports to help you gauge the size of your existing market, of an existing market. If it's a new market, if you're creating a market from scratch, and then it's going to be a little bit harder to triangulate in on a research on the size, because they're probably not going to be somebody who's already sized it because they don't think about it as a market. So see if you can find something that at least helps you kind of triangulate in on it from a level of indirection, even if it's not something about that market in particular. And then you can also go out and do some of your own qualitative and quantitative research. So those are some kind of thoughts or pointers on how you would estimate the total market for your opportunity. Next, remember we talked about there's the addressable market within the total market. So you likely aren't going to be able to sell to everybody in the total market. So you have to begin thinking about what segments within that market do you have a product market fit with, because it's likely only going to be certain segments. So when you think about this, be realistic and think about the different ways that markets are segmented. They're segmented along many different ways. Some examples are features, distribution channel. How do they purchase the product, and are you able to meet that distribution channel? Pricing, are you too expensive? Do they want to purchase on a subscription, and you're trying to sell, on a one-off fee or what have you? Availability of complementary products and services. Do they want post-sales support? Do they want to, other things to go along with the product? So think about that. You have to be really rigorous about this and think about what segments that you can disqualify as potential sales in order to have a more kind of honest and valid understanding of who your target segments are. You know, I've sometimes found as we go through and do that that might actually, you know, if you're talking about product development, that might cause you to kind of iterate. You might need to go back and once you begin, maybe it doesn't look so attractive after you've done a more due diligence on which segments are addressable, and you might have to go back and adjust your product concept to try and address more product. So that's a possibility that comes out of this this step. And so let's walk through an example of how a 10%er might approach this and how you'll approach this in the future. So if we did a sample product, let's say I'm in the ed tech space. So if we did a one-to-one iOS app for students to write essays on, we're going to target grade 3 through 8. So it's an Apple-based app. We might first start off and go get government data on education and find out that, hey, there's 3.9 million kids per grade. So that's 5 grades. There's 23.4 million kids. We're, of course, going to get 10% of those kids. That's 2.3 million student licenses we're going to sell. I mean, that's golden. Let's just go start calling up the VCs. This sounds like a big moneymaker. That's how a 10%er might approach it, and it's not like a highly rigorous way to approach estimating your take in the market. So let's talk about how you might think about that once, you know, as you get more experienced. Well, first, as you dig into it, you might, and you understand your customers and the segments, you might realize 4 states didn't adopt the Common Core standards. So that kind of impacts the type of content that school districts would purchase. And you realize you need to segment on the content feature needs of the market. And once you've done that, you just wiped out 12% of the total market. So you've shrunk it down a little bit. Next, you might do some more research and realize that only 9% of general education students are in public school districts, and your sales force is focused on public school districts. So when you segment on distribution channel, you knock off another 10% of the market as not being addressable to you. And then you read some more research reports, and you find out that one tablet use, that's where students each have a tablet in the classroom, is only 5%, you know, with 5% of students today in those grade ranges. And the predictions are about 20% in 5 years. Further, iOS is 95% of the devices used in schools today, but it's predicted to only be 60% in 5 years, and your app is an iOS app. So when you segment on tech platforms to use, you lop off a fairly large chunk there. So once you start being more clear on what your addressable market is, you realize that in 5 years, your addressable market is only 2.2 million. So that's not the number of student licenses you'll sell. That's just the number of students that you could potentially sell to. And remember, in the previous slide, you know, the 10%er thought we would actually sell to 2.3 million students. So through this type of more rigorous thinking, you can get more realistic estimates on what your what your addressable market is. So now we go on. So we've talked about that you estimate the total market. Then we talk, and then within the total market, you estimate what your addressable market is within there, the segments that you're going to have product fit for. Now we're going to talk about win rates, and this is like the heart of the model. And this is the one that can be fudged the most. It's hardest to come up with good numbers for. So my first bit of guidance here is look for any data that can support your expectations. Don't just pick numbers. Look for anything, and that can be your current sales of similar products into similar segments, competitor sales of similar products into similar segments, but something to ground your assumptions in. You can go out. You should certainly do some research if you're going to make a big investment in a new product. So go out and do some qualitative interviews. Those will give you good qualitative information, but they'll only give you kind of directional information on what your win rate will be. In order to get a win rate, ideally you're going to do some type of quantitative analysis, like a survey. You can go out and look at past product launches and see how well you did with those. So if you that can oftentimes be a good way. So here it was a bit of analysis we did once for a project where we looked at past product launches in a company, and the gray ones were past product launches. You can see there's 2 low ones down here. There was 2 really high ones, but those were very unique. They were had really unique factors as to why they did well. The company first did these, then the 2 ones they launched subsequent to that were much lower penetration in their market. And the company came along and did some projections on what a new product would be. The dashed line was their projection for what the new penetration for what their new product line would be, even though the 2 most recent ones had been down here in terms of penetration. And the green and the black and the red represented their high, medium, and low forecast. So you can see, like when you compare the most 2 recent product launches, these 2 gray lines with this dashed line, which is what they presented to their executive team, like there's a big disconnect, and you want to be able, if you have something that big, you want to be able to explain why it's that big. I mentioned penetration of competitors, is another way to kind of zero in on win rates. Some more ideas on how to think about win rates. Your win rate will be higher when you have a differentiated and defensible value proposition. It'll be lower when you don't have those two things. You're in a crowded market with undifferentiated product. You'll have a higher, you typically will have a higher, be able to have a higher win rate or a higher market share in markets that aren't concentrated. So in the top right here, you see a market that's fairly concentrated. There's 3 firms that control 70% of the market. You're likely not going to get a lot of market share in this. I mean, there's something about that market that those 3 competitors have most of the, good portion of the business tied up. In a market that's not concentrated, like this one down here, where 5 of the top firms only have 40%, you're likely to have a higher win rate. So that's another factor you can look at to try and think about what your win rate's going to be. Customer switching costs, when they're low, you're likely to have a better win rate. So if you're selling, if some products like, let's say, a relational database system that costs a lot of money for customers to switch out. If they're on Oracle and you're trying to sell them another one, there's a fairly large cost to doing that. So that would be an example of something with a high switching cost, which would be difficult to get into. If you have a reliable and established way to sell or distribute your product, you're likely to have a win rate. So if you're already in that market and you already have relationships with the customers you're going to try and sell to, that's a reason to think that you're going to do better. If it's a new market for you, you don't have those relationships, you don't know the customers, you haven't really figured that out yet, that's going to be a strike against your penetration. We just talked about that one. So these are, just kind of bits of guidance to think about how you might think about your win rate. So now we've talked about total market, we talked about addressable market, we talked about how much you're going to win in there. So once you begin to model out how much you think you're going to win and what the the revenue that would generate is and the margin that would generate, you want to think about like what's the bang for your buck, like what are you getting back for this investment. So in practically speaking, product management, these are the 2 things that we use the most. Return on investment, which is the percentage return on your original investment. It has to be for a particular time period. So most 3 to 5 years is usually what we do. Like in software product management, that's pretty typical. In large infrastructure, physical type projects, you might have a longer horizon. An oil pipeline might be 15 or 20 years, but for a typical software project, 3 to 5 is what we usually work with. And you calculate ROI by taking the total gains from this. So that would be the margin that it generates, where margin is revenue minus cost of goods, minus the original investment. So that's kind of what you've made, the gain that you get after the investment, divided by the original investment, and then you times it by 100 to get a percentage. So that's ROI is pretty common, and that's a nice metric to use. Another one to use is payback years, and that's just the number of years required in order to pay back the initial investment. So you start earning, after a year or 2, you start earning some margin. The margin gets greater. At some point, the amount of margin that you make pays back the amount of money it costs you to build the product, and after that, you're just getting return. So there's no hard and fast equation for that. You're just, each year in your model, you calculate, is the cumulative margin for that year greater than or equal to the initial investment. There are other ways of measuring return on investment. If you get more sophisticated about it, there's internal rate of return, there's net present value, and others. But realistically, like I just don't, unless you're like working in an investment bank and a big project in a bank or somewhere where they're sophisticated financially, and it's a really big project. I typically don't see this. I think ROI and payback years should get you by most of the time. So let's look at ROI real quickly. Let's just explain what that is. For any fine arts majors out there. So you would start off trying to figure out for your time period, let's say a 5-year ROI, we would start off with 5 years of revenue, and we would subtract out 5 years of the operating cost, the cost of the revenue, to get the gains. And this doesn't include the initial investment cost, this is just the gain. So that's, the operating cost. So that gives us our margin, our gains for that time period. We would then subtract out all of the initial investment costs to get a number, and then we would divide that by the initial investment. So what's a good investment? It's like, how do you know, like when you've done all this work, you get to the Indian model, like what's a good investment? Well, it really depends on your situation. There's no hard and fast rule. What works for a mature firm that's got slow growth and tight margins is going to be much different for a VC backed startup. So you'd have to figure that in internally. But what you can do is use metrics to compare different projects. So you've got some different options maybe you're looking at. You can use the metric we just looked at to compare options. And I can share like really, really, really basic guidelines for more mature companies. At a more mature company, the ROI on your project at least has to be greater than the cost of capital. And the cost of capital is the amount of money that what companies have to pay in order to get capital. So let's say you're at a larger company, and in order to get money for new projects, they have to issue bonds. Well, if they're paying 10% interest rate on those bonds, and you propose a project to the company that's going to return 9% on your investment, then they would actually lose money on that. They need to make back more than 10% on their investment projects in order to pay back the 10% bonds and still have a little bit left over. Got to beat the cost of capital. You want to beat the opportunity cost. So oftentimes in an organization, there are competing options for what you could do with the money, and your project needs to be better than the next best option. Otherwise, unless there's some other reason to do your project, you want to, all things else being equal, you want to go with the project with the highest return. In general, like a really general rule of thumb, at least in the companies and projects that I've been involved with, like a 2 to 4 year payback period is generally what you want to go for. If it's longer than 2 to 4 payback, sometimes that's acceptable, but though that's going to be a really big long-term investment where you could warrant that. So we've done that. So we've got some analysis. So what's the next thing? Well, to think about this, I think about now we're on the third step is the a scenario, and the fourth step, the scenario analysis. So it's really hard to predict the future. I mean, there's so many unknowns when you're doing a model. You're just guessing, and so you don't want to just make a single guess and leave it at that. You want to do some scenario or sensitivity analysis around that to kind of explore your assumptions and see how you would come out under different outcomes. So one way to do that is scenarios, which is to, in your financial model different potential outcomes. And the second way that I typically use in the past is sensitivity analysis. So just exploring in your model, like how much does the model change if certain variables are changed? If you vary the win rate a little bit, or you vary your content licensing cost a little bit up or down, like what's the impact on your outcome? So let's talk about these for a little bit. In scenarios, like sometimes people, when they're doing these, they would just say, okay, well, we'll do a high, medium, and low scenario, and in the low one, we'll just put all the variables in a manner that's unfavorable to us, and the high one, we'll do all the variables in a manner that's favorable to us. Like, I think that's a bit rudimentary. I think it's better. If you come up with realistic scenarios, and then set the assumptions in your model around those scenarios. So, for example, if you're modeling out a new product opportunity, and your low scenario might be qualitatively that our product is not well differentiated in the market, and we launched it 2 years late because it just took forever to get it built. So now that you've kind of painted a picture of what one realistic outcome might be for your project, then you can go in and kind of set the assumptions in the model based on that. You might have a lower price because your product can't support a higher price. Like you might have your win rate and growth rate are lower. Your investment costs are higher because it took 2 years of dev, and your sales start 2 years later because it took you longer to get to the market. So that I feel like those types of if you paint realistic scenarios and kind of describe them qualitatively is a better way to approach scenario analysis. Sensitivity analysis, like I don't usually do this. This is a little bit more sophisticated, but here's an example of one that we did for a project once. I mean, so we said we wanted to explore how the revenue, and we had projected $414 million revenue for this new business opportunity was going to be. And so what we did is we picked different variables in the market that related to the market size and the addressable market, and we started playing around with them. So, for example, we said, the percentage of existing customers that are up for grabs. So we assume that only so many customers were in the market at any given time. In the model, we said 16 to 22% were up, were in the market in any given year, and we had based that on our interview campaign that we had done. But we said, well, let's play around with that. Like, what if it was down to 12 or 18%, or up to 20 to 26%? How does that impact our $414 million revenue projection? And so you can see, on the low side, it came down to about, I don't know what that is, like 360 million. On the upside, it came up to, what is that, 460 million. And you can just see by the size of the bar that by moving this variable was the thing that impacted the revenues the most. And so we did that with other revenues and I'm sorry, other variables in the model. And again, the idea was, let's just explore like which one of these variables is most, what is the model most sensitive to, and then you can kind of think about making sure you're comfortable with the numbers that you have in that model.
Hey, Mike, we just have a question just came in from Corey. Corey, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, Mike. Thanks.
Hey.
So my question was, if there's a good tool for doing this modeling. For me, I've never done anything like this before, so I was wondering if there's like a template or tool or somewhere that it would be good to get started implementing the metrics.
You know what? That's a great idea. I should have provided a model, sample model. I'll tell you what.
We can't see you, Mike.
Huh?
We can't see you. We see your PowerPoint.
Okay, just
Beautiful.
a second.
There we go.
Now?
Mm-hmm.
I think Corey, that's a great idea. Like a sample model that I could like share with the group would be a really good idea. So I tell you what, while I'm doing this presentation, in the background, I'm going to develop a sample financial model, and then by the end of the presentation, we can look at that sample model.
Wow.
Yeah. How's that sound?
Sounds exciting.
Or I already had it made. One of those two.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
I like thinking we're working on a separate laptop right next to you. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll save a little bit of time, and we'll go through it, and it's a Google Doc, so I'll kind of share it for the world, and you can you're also welcome just to contact me later, and we can talk about it if you wanted.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. So let's see. I'm gonna go back to sharing screen. Do you guys see the screen again?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, great. So another way to think about varying your model to kind of test it is the what do we have to believe thing. So like this is good for exploring what would have to happen in your project in order to achieve a particular outcome. So let's say senior management said, like, look, we're not doing this project unless you can make 10 million in revenue within 5 years. Or they say it's got to break even in 3 years, or it's got to achieve a ROI of 50% in more than 50% in 5 years. Sometimes you kind of have a goal like that, and so you can. This is another way to play around with the model, is to go back and play around with the assumptions and figure out like what's required to meet that target, and then you can think about, are those assumptions realistic, right? So if you have to, yeah, I mean, I guess that says enough, right? So you can. That's often a good alternative way or additional way to think about or to test your model and the assumptions in the model. All right, so that kind of concludes like my discussion on the basics of like financial modeling. Now what I want to do is just kind of walk through like some of the things that I've learned through doing this for many years. And this is just a random grab bag collection of Mike Claiborne's tips and advice. Are you guys seeing a screen that says general tips and advice?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So one, ignore inflation. Self-explanatory. For financial advice, remember to factor in ramp up of your penetration rate over an appropriate amount of time. So if you're launching a new product in a market where customers aren't familiar with this type of product before, like don't assume you're going to hit your end goal in penetration like year one. Like assume like a very slow ramp up time. And then people often forget this one. Don't forget to factor in churn and a recurring revenue business model. So if you sell a subscription service on an annual basis, and you're modeling out how many people you're going to get, assume that you're going to lose some 5 or 10 or whatever percentage of your business each year to churn. Google Spreadsheets, I love it. I used to be hardcore Excel guy, but Google Spreadsheets is sufficient 95% of the time. And the fact that it comes with auto backup and collaboration are fantastic. So I've made the jump from Excel to Google Spreadsheets. And now, like as I started doing financial models, I realized like financial modeling is a lot like coding. So if you're a coder, if you used to do software, like these things are going to resonate with you. First, start with very clear requirements. Like know before you start what questions you need to answer, and then what analysis does that require, so that you kind of are guided in your work. Next, build an MVP first. So don't build the most complex, sophisticated model up front. Just start with something simple, and then you can begin to build it out as you need. Because oftentimes you don't need it that sophisticated. Another one is manage scope. Like don't spend a week modeling a $30,000 investment decisions. Sometimes my financial analysis might just be 10 cells in an Excel document that I don't even bother saving. Like it's really straightforward. So make the work match the decision. Another one is if you are going to do a more complex model, I found sometimes it's helpful to design the model like with a flowchart first before you start building the model, and just make sure. And this is an example of one we did for a more sophisticated one. But just think about like what are all the sources of data you're going to use here. We had 3 different sources of data external to the model. How you're going to flow it through, the different logic that you're going to flow it through. I've found that for a more complicated one, it saves a lot of time if you spend some time up front modeling how you're going to do, modeling the model or diagramming it before you get into it. Build components with interfaces rather than a monolith. So instead of putting your model into one giant, large, complex sheet within the model, try and break it up into different pieces. Like I put the assumptions all on one page. I put my profit and loss statement in one page. I put, the investment return analysis in another page. It makes it just easier to manage. Put all your assumptions in one place. So anything that you put into the model that you might change over time based on different business assumptions, like your win rate or your price or those type things, put those all in one place so that you can go and change them and manipulate them easily. Don't just kind of sprinkle those things throughout your model. QA your model, and you can do that manual and automated. You can QA it manually by just putting test data in it and making sure you see the outcome, right? So if you have a win rate in your model and you put a 0 in there, you should see 0 revenue. And if you see like revenue when you don't have any customers, things like that, you can kind of like make sure the logic's working. You can also just put in automated checks in there to make sure your data looks good. That's typically better for larger models. Clearly document it and make it really clear and easy to read, because it's so often the case that you'll want to come back and look at it in a week or a month or a year, and you won't remember what the hell you did. And like just having it well clean and well documented and easy to read makes it much easier for you or somebody else to pick it up. So I'll label everything in the model. I use notes and description fields to explain why I put something in. I'll color code different types of information to make it easier to read. And then one way to make sure you document things well is never put numbers inside a cell. So like this is an example of an Excel cell here. You see it equals A5 times this 0.5. Like you don't put numbers like that in the cell hidden in there. What you would want to do is pull that 05 out into another cell like B5, and then you refer to it. And then in B5 you can have just that number 0.5, and you can label it and like it's easy to find. Otherwise these little numbers are just hidden in the model and nobody knows where to find them, and it's not easy to use later on. So that's some tips and tricks. I mean, I wanted to just show also just some examples of what it's when you're done with the model, you want to go present your findings presumably to somebody and say like, here's what we came up with. Let's discuss the outcome. And so I want to show some slides from past model exercises we've done. So here are 3 slides. In the first slide we had an optimistic, a base, and a pessimistic scenario. So the first one was just the top line numbers, license revenue, and number of subscriptions. So we compared that across the 3 scenarios. Then we looked at the margin and investment return for each one of those 3 scenarios. So the gross and operating margin, and then the total investment required. And then we looked at investment returns for those things. So in this case, we looked at ROI and NPV and payback years. Not important to look at the particulars of these, but like the general, and you know, I'll share the presentation with you guys. So you can look at it later. But the general message here is it's much easier to digest numbers if you put them into a chart and you can see them graphically and kind of can compare and contrast across models and years. And it's also easier to understand the outcome of a model if you pull out like the most salient pieces of information for your viewers to read. So those are examples of the types of slides you might want to create from a modeling exercise. And now we've got, since Corey asked for the sample model, I've been working furiously in the background, so we're going to look at a sample model. This deck has a link to it.
Before you jump to that, Corey actually had another question for you, so I'm going to hand it back to Corey to ask the question, and as you switch back to the video.
Okay. Hi. So my question was, you mentioned setting scope and not spending a lot of time on something that isn't a huge investment. But what about setting scope on what you're actually modeling and analyzing? Do you have any tips for, like, do you model each feature or just epics, or how do you decide what you're going to model?
Oh goodness.
Maybe it's too.
No, like I mean, you know, I generally would never model a feature unless it's like, but like I don't know if we're speaking the same language. Like a feature in my place might be a sprint or a couple of sprints worth of work, and we generally don't model something like that in my situation. I mean, I typically don't do modeling unless it's large enough to warrant, you know, unless the investment decision is large enough to warrant it. And if I do it, I don't do it on a per feature level. I would usually do the project overall. So, for example, we were looking at killing or rejuvenating a product, and so we did a lot of analysis around that. And the rejuvenation of the project, we estimated it to be $500,000 to $700,000 investment. And so that was a pretty big decision. It was going to take several of my teams for a year to do, and so we did a lot of analysis around that. We did financial, qualitative, etc. So that was one where we definitely modeled it. We didn't go in and model each of the different features in the decision, all the little kind of sub-decisions. We just said, okay, under the most likely scenario, this is what it would cost. Let's go and model that. Sometimes we won't. If there's large enough variations in the project that they have really big differences, we might model those. So in that one, we modeled. I think there's like several different technology platform choices that we could make, and we modeled those. And if we did both an iOS and an Android app versus doing a single HTML5 app, I mean, those were big enough differences in revenue. I'm sorry, and costs as well as potential revenue, that we did do different models for those. But in terms of, like, there are a lot of sub decisions beneath that about would we pull over this particular feature or would we drop that feature? Like, we didn't model those. I mean, that you kind of have to like have a sense of judgment about what's the level of granularity that you want to get down into. Did that answer the question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so we don't have any other questions at the moment, so I'm going to hand it back to you in just a sec, Mike. But for those of you who also want to get your questions to Mike, submit your questions to our Google Moderator channel at theproductmentor.com/live. So let me hand it right back to you now, Mike.
All right, so let's go look at an example model. I threw this one together very quickly, and it's really, you know, I just want to make sure I'm like qualifying this well enough. It's just meant to be representative, but I wanted to show a couple of things in here that my approach is. So first, as you'll see across the bottom, like I've broken this up into several different components or modules. I feel like that's much easier to work on and to use and read if you do that. So I'll start off by putting all of. Are you guys able to see the model?
Yep.
Okay, great. So you see on the first tab, I've got all my assumptions, and so I just kind of have all my assumptions in one place, and then it's easier to go and change them and know where they are. And in the assumptions, I will color all my assumptions a particular color, so I know what's changeable. So you'll see in here, everything in a yellow cell is kind of a business decision or a business assumption that I've made, and I might change it based on you know, whatever understanding I have of the situation. Here are these cells right here are ones that are not assumptions I made. They're actually calculations of assumptions. So I didn't color those yellow because I wouldn't change this number directly. But I might, you know, here, like for example, this line here is the initial cost of the initial software development. You know, we estimated that it's going to be $300,000, for 2 years in a row, and then we're going to stop all of the initial development, and we'll just have some maintenance development after that. So this, these initial development costs are things that I got from my developers. They're things that we believe today, but my developers might come back next week and tell me, hey, it looks more complex. We're going to increase that estimate. So I'll put all the estimates here, all the assumptions here. One really important thing to do is, in your assumptions, is to document where you got that number from, right? So here you see in this row we have an assumption about what percentage of students will have one-to-one devices, right? Well, that's like a pretty big, and for our market, since we're selling to students that have one-to-one devices, that's a pretty big assumption and our driver of the model. We want to know where that came from. So I note here that it came from a Forrester report entitled Students with Devices, dated 2014. And that way, in a week or a month or a year, if you or somebody else wants to come in and figure out like where the hell these numbers come from, like you got nicely sourced. Some assumptions change for each year, and so for those I've got them broken out by year. This one alone here doesn't change on each year. Got it in a non-annual column. This one is what's the cost of maintenance on the product after we do the initial development, and I'm assuming maintenance is 20% of the initial investment, which is a general rule of thumb, industry standard. So that's my assumptions tab. That's where I will go in and fiddle with the model numbers. Here's an example of pulling in some external data. So in this case, we're modeling sales to the education sector. So what I did is I went, you'll see up top, I went to NCES, which is a federal research agency. I kept their website here. I pulled that data per state, per grade, number of enrolled students across the country. You'll see here that all these numbers are blue, and I do that. That's a style I use and other people use, and that indicates that those are numbers that I pulled from an external source, and that I wouldn't ever expect to change those. Like they're kind of immutable, so leave them alone. Around that, you'll see some numbers are black. These are ones that are calculations that I've got based off of the numbers from the external source. So this is, some external data I pulled in with some calculations. Next, we'll go to the tab which has the forecast P&L, right? Like this in a model is kind of where all the magic happens. I mean, this is where we estimate the total market. Here, it's not as big of a deal to estimate that. Here's where we do some calculations on the addressable market. So this is these are the earlier in this PowerPoint presentation I talked about an example about how you would narrow down a total market into an addressable market. I put those calculations into this model. So we've got these different filters on the addressable market for each year, and then we've got it across the year so that we can estimate the addressable market for each year. So at the end of this line, I've got this is the number of students that I would realistically be able to sell to in each year. And we see it's gradually going up because of population increase, and also because changes in device use, penetration of devices into public schools. In this next section, we've got revenue. So we didn't start selling until about this year. I put in a little bit of fanciness here. I put in some stuff around a couple of lines around the calculations on how I do subscription-based businesses. So instead of just having number of students and then revenue, students times price to get revenue, I kind of modeled out the how many students I would have each year. So here on this line, I have the students that I have at the beginning of the year. I add on in the next two lines the new students that I add that year from new sales. I subtract out the number that I lose from churn or unhappy customers, and then at the end of the year, that's what I've got at the end of the year. So that kind of shows like the change in my subscriber base across the year. And each year, the beginning of each year is the ending of the last year. And so I got so at the end here on this line 17, we've got end of year students. So that's the number of licenses or students, licensees that are licensed product, that are units of sale that I have each year. So I multiply that times my price, and I get my revenue for the year. In this section, I've got scaling out costs and making realistic. This is really short and abbreviated because it's just a sample model. But here's a couple of examples of what our costs would look like. I think the first for 3 of these are just all scale linearly with the number of, the first 2 scale linearly with the number of students, and then the third one is with sales. And those are 2 different things, right? Because your customer support is going to be typically driven off the number of customers you have, and that's good, and not the revenue, because whereas sales commission is going to be driven off of revenue because they get paid on commission. And those 2 things, so those are slightly different drivers, because revenue is going to be different from volume because of pricing. So if your pricing changes over time, those are slightly different drivers. Maintenance development, the cost of kind of maintaining the product over time, doing all those feature enhancements. So that gets to the total cost, and then the margin is just the revenue minus the cost. So that's it. That's like a really simple, basic P&L right there for the business. I've got some of the metrics down below. I mean, these are things you just kind of want to look at to get a sense for the dynamics of the model. So I've got penetration. I've got the profit margin. We're losing money the first year, gradually gets better over time. We've got revenue growth. We've got license volume growth. You'll see revenue grows more in this year, because I think in this year we raised the price. So just kind of lets you kind of see how the dynamics of the model based on the assumptions you've got. So that's a basic P&L, and then on the final one, I've just got some very basic investment analysis. So I did a 5-year ROI. So we took the 5-year revenue. That's cumulative 5-year revenue. We took 5 years of cost. That's the not the investment cost, but the cost of doing business each year. We subtracted one from the other to get the margin, or the 5-year gain, and then the total investment was $300,000 each for 2 years, 600, and
That was exciting.
so here the cumulative margin is not more. Can you guys still see my screen?
We see your face right now. It looks like Google Hangout had a weird hiccup and just restarted all of us.
Uh-oh.
So if you could just back up maybe about 30, 60 seconds, that would be super.
Okay. Do you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
All right, so yeah, this is just an example calculation for payback, right? So you've got the initial investment. You've got each year I've calculated out the cumulative margin, and then you're just doing a test each year to see whether that cumulative margin is more than the investment. And the first year that cumulative margin is more than your original investment is the number of years that it takes you to pay back. So in this case, it took us 6 years to get a payback, and that's for like a typical like software project, I mean that's like a pretty long time. Like that, your manager's probably going to come back and ask you like what what can we do to get that down to something closer to 2 to 3 years. They don't like seeing 6 years. But anyway, the calculation's here, and you can see how it was done. And like that includes concludes the Mike Claiborne 20 minute 1 hour overview on financial analysis.
And we just had one other question just come in. It's from Chris in Boston, and Chris was asking if you have any tips for building out a monthly P&L report. And if you can switch back to your video, that would be great. Yeah.
A monthly P&L report. So I think when we look at doing when I think about reporting, you're always thinking about like who's the reader and what decisions or insights are they trying to get out of reading that report. So without like context, if I had, I have a product, I manage a couple products, and we do financial analysis on a monthly basis, and we'll look at revenue, and we'll look at profit for the product lines. And what we'll usually do is forecast it out to the end of the year based on performance so far. And so we'll get a total year projection of revenue, total year projection of costs, and then we'll compare that to the budget. And that way we can, and so each year gets, each month it gets a little bit more accurate because you're getting closer to the end of the year. And that'll give you a sense for where you're tracking in terms of, are you going to hit your revenue or your margin targets? I mean, that's one way to think about it. Another one, when I look at P&L analysis, is I'll do historical trend analysis. So you want to track out like how you perform, how you're doing this year. Maybe you might have 1 or 2 or 3 years of historical patterns there. If you have a cyclical business, you can see if this year's cycle is meeting the same pattern that you've seen last year. Are you historically, what does your growth rate look like over 2 or 3 years? What does your margin growth rate look like over several years? So looking at different ways of trend analysis is also useful. I find when I'm looking at financial numbers, like rarely is it useful to look at a number in isolation, right? So if you heard that Google made $1.3 billion in net income in their last quarter, like that piece of information by itself is really pretty useless. Like what's helpful to know is, like, was that more or less than that same quarter in the previous year or the previous quarter? What percentage is that net income of their total revenue? So usually when I think about putting together financial reports, I'm always trying to put them in context of something, to show a comparison against something else or a trend over time, to kind of put some context in there.
Awesome. And we have another question from Tamika in New York. And Tamika asks, do you feel that an in-depth background in business is required to achieve success as a product manager?
Yeah, no, not at all. No, I mean, not at all. And like my favorite examples are Michael Dell, Steve Jobs, and Bill Gates, who didn't even finish college, right? I mean, those guys learned what they needed to learn on the job. And I go out there. There are lots of people that I run into that don't have a formal business education and do quite fine. Now, I still think you need to be cognizant of the skills that are demanded of the job that you want now or the job that you're going for, and then kind of fill in gaps where they are. So if you don't have any type of financial analysis and that's required in your job, then you might want to go out and look at General Assembly or Coursera or somewhere, or even your local community college, and see if there's courses that you can take. Cost management and basic accounting are two great ones to have for somebody who wants to move into a managerial role.
Right. Cool. And just a comment, it looks like, from someone named Bobby, recommending a product called SaaS.fm, SaaS.fm. I don't know if you're familiar with this at all, Mike, but it looks like it asks you some questions and it helps build your model for you through potentially interesting interface.
I don't like that. I don't like that because that puts guys like me out of business. I'm just joking. No, that's kind of easy. That's actually pretty interesting. I would like to go play around with that. I'll look at that after the.
Looking just now. Let's see. I think that's all the questions we have right now. Really awesome job there, Mike. As always, the presentation that Mike just presented will be posted to our SlideShare channel very quickly. And again, thanks, Mike, to our speaker, Mike Claiborne, Director of Product Management at Amplify, for today's discussion on financial modeling. A big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and to everyone else who joined us today in the room as well as online through the live stream through the productmentor.com/live. Also, if you're interested in being a mentor, very much like Mike, or even a mentee like Lynn and Corey, we've got right next to Mike along the bottom of your screen. Definitely, we're looking for product people of all sorts, especially on the mentor side. Please visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. Like I said, we're always looking for more mentors. If you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, we also offer a free job board that just helps connect product people with product jobs. And you can check that out at theproductjobs.com. And once again, thank you, everybody, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.